Okay, so we're diving into this book that has honestly kind of blown my mind a little bit. Like, I've always been fascinated by habits, right? You know, those little things we do almost on autopilot. But this book takes it to a whole other level by suggesting that our habits are way more than just actions. They actually shape who we become as people.
Yeah, it's like mind-blowing, right? The book argues that if we want to make real changes in our lives, the kind that actually stick, it's not enough to just focus on the end goal. Instead, we need to work on transforming our inner selves, our identity, to align with the person we want to be. So basically, in this deep dive, we're exploring this core idea, how our habits and our sense of self are basically inseparable.
Exactly. And we want to make sure that you, our listener, can walk away from this with some actionable insights, ways you can actually apply this powerful concept to create those meaningful and sustainable changes in your own life. Let's jump right in. The book argues that the changes that really last, those aren't the ones that happen because we're just super disciplined or whatever. It's about shifting how we see ourselves or identity rather than just chasing a particular result.
You hit the nail on the head. It's about becoming a certain kind of person, embodying that change. It's not just about, finally getting through that one book you've been meaning to read. It's about becoming a reader. It's not about completing just one marathon. It's about truly seeing yourself as a runner. And it's not about picking up a guitar and learning a couple of chords. It's about considering yourself a musician. That shift in identity, according to the book, is what fuels consistent action.
Makes so much sense. I don't know about you, but I've definitely been there setting these ambitious goals like, oh, this time I'm really going to stick to eating healthy, or I'm finally going to learn Spanish. But then inevitably, I slip back into my old habits, you know? This book really made me realize that maybe my approach was wrong all along. Maybe it wasn't so much about willpower, but about not really embracing the identity shift that comes with that change.
Totally. The book actually outlines 3 distinct levels of change. First, you have outcomes, which are like the tangible results, like I want to lose 10 pounds or I want to land a promotion. Then you have processes, which are basically the systems and habits we put in place to get us to those outcomes, like following a specific workout plan or dedicating a certain amount of time each day to studying for that certification exam. But the most fundamental level, the one that drives the other 2, is identity, the core beliefs we hold about ourselves.
So it's not that outcomes and processes aren't important, they totally are. But this book emphasizes that to really make those changes stick, it's essential to address that deeper level of identity. So can you give us a real-world example of how this identity shift, actually plays out in someone's life?
Absolutely. Imagine someone who's been a smoker, for years. They might have tried to quit countless times, focusing on the outcome, not smoking, or even on the process, like avoiding trigger situations. But what often leads to lasting change is when their identity shifts. When they start seeing themselves as a non-smoker, someone who simply doesn't smoke. That internal shift, according to the book, is much more powerful than just relying on willpower.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. It's not just about the action of smoking or not smoking. It's about who you believe yourself to be in relation to that action. Now, for you listening, think about a change you've been trying to make. Were you mainly focused on the end result you wanted to achieve? Or on the specific steps you needed to take? Or did you actually take a moment to reflect on the kind of person you wanted to become through that change?
That question is so important because it leads us to how identity-based habits actually function in our daily lives. The key idea here is that when you concentrate on who you want to be, your actions will start to align with that desired identity. It's like you've got an internal compass guiding your choices.
And I think the book even mentions some really interesting research that kind of backs this up, especially around the language we use when we talk about making changes.
Right. There was a fascinating study where people who were trying to, let's say, break a certain habit, they had way more success when they made a statement like, I'm not a person who does this, instead of saying, I'm trying to stop doing this. That subtle but significant shift in self-perception, where they embraced a new identity, had a real impact on their ability to stick with it.
That's so powerful. I think when you say, I'm trying, it almost feels like you're giving yourself permission to fail. Like it's still a struggle, something temporary. But when you say, I'm not, that feels so much more definitive. So for our listeners out there, think about a situation where you were working on building a new habit. How might intentionally adopting the identity of someone who already embodies that habit strengthen your resolve in those moments when it gets tough? Like really embracing that statement, whether it's I'm a healthy eater or I'm a consistent learner, how might that impact your actions?
And this brings us to a really practical 2-step process that the book outlines for intentionally shifting your identity. It's really simple but incredibly effective. Step one is to decide, with clarity, who you want to be. And step two is to prove it to yourself, not to anyone else, through small wins. The book emphasizes that our habits, those consistent actions we take, essentially become the evidence of our new identity.
It's not about some magical overnight transformation. It's about steadily building up a body of evidence that supports the identity you want to embody. Can you give us a concrete example of how this might look in practice?
Sure. Imagine someone who wants to become a more creative person. They might start by making that clear decision, I want to be someone who creates regularly. Then they start proving it to themselves through small, manageable actions. Maybe it's writing one paragraph a day or spending just 5 minutes sketching or taking a few moments each morning to brainstorm new ideas. Each of those tiny actions, even if they seem insignificant on their own, is a piece of evidence that reinforces their identity as a creative individual. Over time, those small wins accumulate, creating momentum and making that new identity feel more real, more attainable.
I love that idea of small wins adding up over time. It's like the book says, every time you sit down to write, even if it's just a sentence or two, you're casting a vote for being a writer. Every time you commit a few minutes to learning something new, you're reinforcing your identity as someone who values growth. And it's those consistent actions taken with intention that truly solidify who we believe ourselves to be. So I want to challenge our listeners. What's one small, concrete action that you can realistically take today to reinforce the identity you're aiming for? Think about it and commit to taking that action.
And this brings us to the heart of why the book argues that habits are so fundamental. It's not just about achieving a specific result. It's about the profound and ongoing impact our habits have on shaping who we are at our core.
It really challenges that notion that we're just stuck with whatever personality traits or tendencies we were born with, right?
Totally. The book makes a really empowering point that our identity isn't fixed. It's not set in stone. It's actually malleable, something we can actively shape through the conscious choices we make about our habits.
So how does our brain actually fit into all of this? Why are we so wired to form habits in the first place?
Well, it all comes down to efficiency. Our brains are amazing, complex organs, but they're also incredibly lazy. They're constantly looking for ways to conserve energy, to automate solutions to recurring problems. Building habits is essentially a way for our brains to put certain tasks on autopilot, which then frees up our cognitive resources to tackle new challenges or make those more complex decisions.
I always think about those super successful people who have these very specific routines, like their morning rituals or pregame rituals. The book actually talks about how those routines aren't just quirks, they're strategic.
Exactly. They're like a set of automated behaviors that help them manage stress, focus their energy, and just get into the right headspace to perform at their best. By having those habits in place, they don't have to waste mental energy on figuring out what to do next or how to get themselves in the zone. It's already programmed in.
There's also that classic example of the person who intentionally limits the number of decisions they make in a day, like by wearing a similar outfit every day or always having the same thing for breakfast. The idea is to reduce that decision fatigue, to free up mental bandwidth for the things that truly matter. So for our listeners, think about those areas in your life where you feel overwhelmed or scattered, where you find yourself constantly making decisions. Could establishing some positive habits that align with who you want to be actually help reduce that mental clutter and allow you to focus on what's most important to you?
Totally. And to really understand how we can consciously design these habits that reinforce our desired identity, the book breaks down the science of habit formation into a super helpful framework called the habit loop.
All right, let's break down this habit loop. It consists of 4 key components. The first one is which is basically the trigger that signals to your brain that it's time to initiate a certain behavior.
Think of it like, your alarm clock going off in the morning, and that's a cue.
Next, we have the craving, which is the motivational force behind the habit. It's the desire or the urge that you feel in response to that cue.
So in response to your alarm going off, the craving might be the desire to hit the snooze button and get a few more minutes of sleep. Or maybe, if you're really dedicated to that morning workout routine, it's the anticipation of that feeling of energy and accomplishment you get after a good workout.
Then we have the response, which is the actual habit you perform, the action itself.
So that would be hitting the snooze button or getting out of bed and lacing up your running shoes.
And finally, we have the reward, which is the positive reinforcement you experience after performing the habit. That's what solidifies the entire loop, making it more likely that you'll repeat the habit in the future.
So the reward for hitting the snooze button is like those few extra minutes of sleep. The reward for going for that run might be the endorphin rush, the feeling of accomplishment, or even just checking that workout off your to-do list. But the important link to identity here is how this loop, when consistently aligned with the person you want to be, strengthens that identity with every repetition.
It's like each time you act in a way that reinforces that desired identity and you experience that positive reward, you're basically casting a vote for that version of yourself. It
Yeah.
solidifies that connection in your brain.
Exactly. So for everyone listening, I encourage you to think about a habit you're trying to develop, one that's directly connected to how you want to see yourself. Can you pinpoint the cue that sets off that urge, the craving you experience, the specific action you take in response, and the reward you receive? Understanding those components gives you so much power in consciously shaping that habit loop to reinforce your desired identity.
Absolutely. And the book provides a bunch of practical strategies for actually building these identity reinforcing habits through what it calls the 4 laws of behavior change. While we'll be delving into these laws in much more detail in our future episodes, it's worth touching on them briefly here.
These laws make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. They offer a really tangible framework for making those desired habits stick. Just to give you a quick example, research has shown that simply having healthy food options readily available and visible can significantly increase the likelihood of choosing those options over less healthy alternatives. If your goal is to identify as a healthy person, making healthy choices obvious in your environment is a really practical first step.
Makes perfect sense. It's about setting yourself up for success. And I know we'll dive deeper into the make it attractive and make it satisfying aspects in our next deep dives, but what about that make it difficult part? How does that factor in?
Yeah, so make it difficult is often more relevant when you're trying to break an undesirable habit. But it can also indirectly support a desired identity. Like if you're trying to become someone who doesn't spend hours on social media, making those apps less accessible, maybe hiding them in a folder or logging out every time you use them, can strengthen that identity by reducing the frequency of that unwanted behavior.
It's like putting obstacles in the way of those habits that don't serve you. So as we wrap up this first part of our exploration, think about how you can make those habits that align with your desired identity more obvious, more appealing, and easier to incorporate into your daily life. And think about how you can make those unwanted habits less obvious and more difficult to engage in. It's all about setting yourself up for success.
To summarize this first part of our deep dive, the key takeaway here is that true, lasting habit change isn't just about achieving those external goals. It's about the internal transformation, about becoming the person you aspire to be. And your habits are the engine driving that change, constantly shaping and reinforcing your sense of self.
And the power lies in recognizing that even those small, seemingly insignificant actions, those everyday habits, are actually powerful votes for the person you are becoming. So choose your habits wisely because they are shaping who you are.
This is a critical analysis, but it only scratches the surface. Read the book to grasp the full depth.